Welcome to Talking Feds One-on-One, deep dive discussions with national figures about the most fascinating and consequential issues defining our culture and shaping our lives. I'm your host, Harry Littman. I'm here with the formidable, maybe I'd say indomitable, Marcy Wheeler, who you know well and who is known by her moniker of Empty Wheel and who blogs at Empty Wheel and is on many outlets and TV, and the author of Anatomy of Deceit, a primer on the CIA leak investigation. All right, we're only a couple months from inauguration, and I think there's going to be a real brouhaha ahead about the existence of and the, more importantly, content of any report from Jack Smith, which from his perch outside the government, Trump will try to battle, and then if he goes... Once he takes the reins, I think we can expect it to be, vaporized from history, 1984 style. So I wanted to focus in on what is really missing in the historical record, especially in Mar-a-Lago. We know we've had the January 6th committee report and the long Smith brief in the January 6th case. And no one better than this, I think, for all the sort of details and digging deep than Marcy. So I'm really pleased to have her here. Thanks for joining. We're allowed to say where you are? Yeah.
Yeah.
She's already taken exile. She was a former in the Bonny Island of Ireland. So what time is it there now?
It is 5:30.
There you go.
It's completely dark here. So, and we had right. we had this much snow overnight. So it was a big day for us.
There you go. Well, it's pretty dark here too, although the sun is shining. Let's really zero in. My supposition, Marcy, but I think as your meticulousness is second to none, is that there are really pretty damn big holes in the Mar-a-Lago public record, and that if Smith doesn't fill in with a report, may never be filled in. So I wanted to basically frame that as the overall question for you. I have 5 or 6 things that strike me as gaps, but let me just serve it up to you in general. If everything were frozen now, what would history lose about the whole Mar-a-Lago investigation and case?
Well, let me take a step back and say we're going to know probably by December 2nd where this is going to go. And I would be thoroughly unsurprised if whatever Jack Smith does, he does before Dick Durbin loses the gavel on Senate Judiciary Committee. So I would be thoroughly unsurprised if we not only get a report, but get a hearing before Jack Smith disappears into the ether. And so I'm not sure things will disappear into the ether. But to talk about what we'll get, let's go back and talk about what the report requires, right? So it is a prosecution and declinations report. If people remember the Her report, that was 388 pages of nothing but declinations. He went one by one. Why not charge the box in the garage? Why not charge the diaries? Why not charge the box at Penn Center? Why not charge the documents at University of Delaware? And so you can tell a very large story, not just of what was charged, but what wasn't charged. And I think that's actually going to be the more interesting parts of the story that we get. I think that in Mar-a-Lago, we know that a few of the documents have been declassified since they were charged. So we may actually get some of the documents he took, right?
Let me just stop you here. I'm because look, this is a little bit awkward, or just not. It's not a classic fit, because he made charging decisions that presumably were backed by prosecution memos there. What makes us think that there were, and that I think the actual case charged that we really need so much more information about, what makes us think that there were all kinds of things that weren't charged, just because any thorough prosecutor goes soup to nuts through the federal code?
No, let me tell you 3 things that weren't charged that I expect to see, or that I would hope to see in a report. One is people who weren't charged. So in January 6th, right, we have 6 unindicted co-conspirators. We take out Jeffrey Clark. We throw in Steve Bannon and Mike Roman, who were treated as co-conspirators with the immunity report. So why weren't they charged? It may be no more complex than we learned the lesson from Mueller and we don't charge people until after they can't be pardoned. So that's one question. And also, by the way, we may get an answer to why Scott Perry couldn't be charged, right? Remember, his phone was seized. They took longer getting into his phone than anybody else. So we may get the thoroughly unsatisfying explanation for why we're not seeing investigations of members of Congress, which is that speech and debate covers virtually everything they did associated with the insurrection.
And would that be with the satisfying details of what they, Mueller didn't charge?
Yes, hopefully.
But
yes.
So here is what they did do. And I would think, by the way, that should be the same for Jeff Clark. Okay, here's the reason why, but here's what he did.
Right. We can't charge him because Supreme Court said we couldn't, but here's what he did. And in Mar-a-Lago, we know there were 2 cooperating witnesses, at least, Eric Hirschman, but we know 2 with legal exposure, Yuscil Taveras and probably Molly Michael. So why weren't they charged?
Is one of those number 16, as it were?
Number 16, I think, is Eric Hirschman, yeah.
So Hirschman and tell us who Molly is.
Molly Michaels was Trump's executive assistant at the White House and continued to be at Mar-a-Lago. And there were things found in her desk. And I'm going to get to those in just a second. But the big one in Mar-a-Lago that I'm actually really fascinated by is, for a long time, we believed that Attorney 2 was Boris Epshteyn, right? Because he was in the middle, he was in the thick of all of this. He was the one who called up Christina Bobb and said, come write a declaration, even though you have no basis for that declaration. Some reporting that ABC did about a year ago made it clear that no, Attorney 2 is actually Jennifer Little. And so it's not clear whether Boris Epshteyn is mentioned at all in the Mar-a-Lago indictment, even though he was in the thick of things. So that's one possibility of, do we learn more about what Epshteyn did in this time which is crucially important, Harry, because remember, the nominee for Deputy Attorney General of DOJ, the guy who basically runs DOJ on a day-to-day basis, is Todd Blanche. And before he was Donald Trump's attorney, he was Boris Epshteyn's. And so to the extent that Epshteyn and he is co-conspirator number 6 in the January 6th case, that's now been fairly much confirmed.
Epshteyn.
Yeah. And he is the pivot between Rudy Giuliani and Steve Bannon. And this is all stuff we learned in October. This is all new stuff. A lot of the communications that involve Bannon and get him promoted to a co-conspirator in the immunity brief that wasn't in the indictment, those are communications involving Epshteyn. And so probably involving his phone. I speculated a while ago that I think there may have been a delay in both Mike Roman and Epshteyn's phones in exploiting those. And if that's the case, it may have come after the August 1st, 2023 indictment, and therefore stuff that they only subsequently learned. But that would be interesting, right? Because Todd Blanche would have been involved in claims of privilege. I mean, there is a document from Mar-a-Lago where somebody who sounds suspiciously like the potty-mouthed Eric Hirschman says, oh, Epshteyn had no legal involvement. I think he was claiming to be a lawyer to cover stuff he did, with some potty mouth thrown in. And
excuse me, I know I keep interjecting you because I'm worried we won't go back enough, but just on Blanche, I thought it's pretty clear that you're saying it's Epshteyn, but Blanche, God, I'm rusty on this stuff. We need a report. But I thought Blanche had a big role in who goes down to Mar-a-Lago to give all the legal advice once the subpoena is served?
Evan Corcoran.
Oh, Evan. Right. I'm sorry.
Right.
Okay.
So he is attorney 1 in the indictment, and Jennifer
right.
Little is attorney 2. And so we're still left wondering, where the hell is Epshteyn, right? We don't know. So, I mean, Blanche, there's no reason to believe he has any criminal exposure. But, if we're going to have a confirmation hearing for Blanche in January, and he was in the thick of delaying the investigation into what happened at Mar-a-Lago through his representation of Epshteyn, then I think it becomes an interesting side angle that could be in the report. I don't know that Epshteyn will be in that, but I mean, he certainly, if they do declinations of people who weren't charged, he would be on the January 6th side. So that's one thing. Who didn't get charged? Another thing is what behavior wasn't charged. And there's actually stuff for both January 6th and Mar-a-Lago. So in January 6th, we know in December of 2023, prosecutors were like, can we talk about the Proud Boys? We want to bring the Proud Boys in as 404B evidence. That's not in the immunity brief. They literally have Trump saying, here's all the January 6ers I want to pardon. And they take out his reference to Enrique Tarrio, even though they had included it in the earlier 404B reference. So
in the earlier 404B, you mean the notification months before to Trump?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So we know there are ties to the Proud Boys. And in fact, the entire Proud Boys leaders trial was set up as Trump kind of kicking it off. So do prosecutors make a tie between the Proud Boys and Donald Trump? Well, that would be pretty inflammatory. And that's something that we might see. Another thing that I think it likely will see is, remember the prosecutor spent a long time investigating the fundraising that Trump did for January 6th. And fundraising for a January 4, 2021 rally is in the immunity brief, but not the fundraising for January 6th. There's a counterpart to this in the January 6th committee report where they're like, they raised all this money and then used it to pay for things that weren't what they told the donors they were going to spend the money on. And so that's a loose thread.
Can you elaborate on that just a little? What did they tell them?
They said they were going to spend the money on voter integrity, and they spent it on legal fees, basically.
Well, I didn't they give some travel help to some of the?
No. That's actually what prosecutors spent a good part of 2021 investigating, and it ended up being a dry hole. I mean, it ended up being the heiress to Publix funded a lot of it, and so it wasn't money laundering. It wasn't what a lot of people thought. But the funding specifically tied to January 6th. Right. And this is a prong. You might even see a declination decision for Sidney Powell because they also did this investigation of Sidney Powell on the same premise. It's very similar to the theory that SDNY used against Steve Bannon and his co-conspirators in New York, that they said we're going to spend money on a wall, and instead Steve Bannon
that they're still using. He's still on the hook for, right?
Yeah, he's still
going to trial in the spring in theory. Yeah.
Yes. So those are two potential criminal descriptions that were not charged in the January 6th case. In Mar-a-Lago, there are two that I'm really fascinated by. One is we know from the special master documentation that there was a document found probably in the executive assistant's desk. They found what they called a compilation. And it included low-level classified information.
It included listings that referred to low-level classified information, or she had classified docs in her drawer.
She had classified docs in her drawer. It is understood that there was a compilation made with some confidential and some maybe secret information, but it was a compilation. So in addition, there was a message from a pollster.
So a sheaf of papers. By compilation, you don't mean an index. You mean a sheaf of actual papers.
We don't know. I sort of imagined it as a like it could be a fundraising document. Because what gets compiled with it is a pollster's message, a religious leader's message, a book author's message. So just imagine that there's some classified information about, say, Israel. And they put it into a flyer to send out to donors. The classified information in it is probably not enough to reach the level of national defense information, which is what gets charged under 793. But it's classified information. They found it in the desk. So explain to us what that document was. That's one I hope they get to explain. And the other one is my complete obsession and may just be mine. But document one, the first classified document they found during the search of Mar-a-Lago in Donald Trump's desk drawer was a document classified secret about Emmanuel Macron. Now, what's especially interesting about it is that's document 1A in the inventories. Document 1 is what is described as a grant of executive clemency for Roger Stone.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
What?
No,
Okay,
this is why I'm obsessed with it, Harry, right?
Yeah. So let me get the facts down. 1 is the Stone clemency. 1A is the Macron document.
Correct.
And that 1 and 1A is a nomination by the feds.
By the feds. And we don't know what that means. We know that means there is some association. Maybe they were stuck in a folder together. Now, don't you want to know what this is?
Yes.
Yes. And most people have
Roger
assumed,
Stone, like a bad penny, just keeps turning up.
And here's the thing is there were a bunch of clemency documents in Molly Michael's desk. Okay. And these were like, here's why you should pardon this war criminal. Here's why you should pardon this crook. Those were in a different desk. These are in Donald Trump's desk drawer. We know that from documents that were released during the filings. And everyone has assumed that the grant of executive clemency was either the commutation Stone got in July of 2020 or the pardon we know he got in December of 2020. But what if, because remember that in May of 2017, GRU also hacked Emmanuel Macron, same kind of hack and leak they did to Hillary Clinton. And at least one of the same GRU hackers was involved in both. They actually indicted that as part of the South Korean GRU indictment in October of 2020, days before the 2020 election, Western District of Pennsylvania. So Scott Brady, one of the Trumpiest U.S. attorneys, indicts...
My successor. Yeah.
Gosh. So he indicts...
You didn't know that, yeah.
I hadn't done the math, but he indicts the GRU for what is mostly the South Korean hack, right? The Olympic hack.
Yeah.
But included in there is this sort of throwaway. And they're like, oh, and they also hack and leaked Emmanuel Macron in May of 2017. So it's actually been indicted.
Wow. Let me just say, you know this already, but I want the listeners to understand, Brady is the go-to guy for the political Trumpy charges, investigation, whatever it is in the the whole administration.
Well, and I mean, it was right to indict this in Western District of Pennsylvania. It's Pittsburgh. It's where a lot of the investigation happened anyway. But what's super interesting about this indictment, they throw in the Macron hack and leak, but they say, and this is ridiculous. This is just absolutely insane. They say, we have no idea how the documents got from the GRU to be released on Twitter. And that's not true. Like a full year before that, we knew, I mean, Jack Posobiec, I'll get to the punchline is Jack Posobiec played a key role in it. Another alt-right guy played a key role in it. The only thing we didn't know a year before this indictment from, security researchers was the person behind an IP in Latvia or somewhere like that. And I'm like, you're telling me the FBI can't find what's behind an IP address in an allied country? That's ridiculous.
And Marcy, what's the context of their saying to the court? We don't know what they wouldn't. That doesn't seem like normal. The indictment says we don't know.
Yeah.
That's unusual indictment language. Okay, fair enough. Go ahead, man. You are
saying. This is my obsession. This is like it. Jack Smith, if you are taking requests, please explain to me what tie there is between an executive grant of clemency for Roger Stone and this document about Emmanuel Macron, because that's been my obsession. And there are certainly other documents. Like another thing we might see, for example, is remember Kash Patel, who might run the FBI if he's lucky. Kash Patel ran out early and he said, oh, this was the Crossfire Hurricane documents. This was some of the documents about impeachment. It is not outside the realm of possibility that Jack Smith will say, oh, in addition to the 30 charge documents, and he may provide more detail about what the charge documents are. In addition to those, we also found this Crossfire Hurricane document that was sort of half declassified, so we didn't charge it, but Donald Trump took it home. Here's the binder that we were looking for. So we may find stuff like that. Here's what we found in the search. We didn't charge it for X, Y, and Z reason. So those are two things, like who didn't get charged and why not? What documents. And again, this is parallel to exactly what Hur did. Like, why didn't you charge the box in the garage? Why didn't you charge the Roger Stone, Emmanuel Macron document? And what is the tie between Emmanuel Macron and Roger Stone? If we get a report, those are the kinds of things we may find in the report. And by far, the most important thing we may get in a declination report in the report are two crimes that weren't charged. One is 18 USC 2071, right? That was Trump was charged for retaining national defense information in Mar-a-Lago. He was not charged for taking classified documents from DC. So 18 USC 793 is retaining national defense information. 18 USC 2071 is taking classified information. And the reason this is important is the punishment for 2071 is only 3 years. It's not that big a deal, but it would disqualify somebody from taking office again.
793 would.
No, 2071. 2071.
The what was not charged. Yeah, okay. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. So we'll hopefully get an explanation for why it wasn't charged. You probably were about to give two really good explanations for why it wasn't. One is that you may need Walt Nauta as a witness to charge that, because Walt Nauta, the indictment actually tells us Walt Nauta was very centrally involved in packing up these documents. And there's a witness who described that Trump knew precisely what was on his stacks, if something got taken away, he knew it was missing. So you do have substance to know that Trump knew what he was taking when he was taking it, but you may not be able to charge it because you need Nauta as a witness. And now you're going to tell me that you can't charge it for constitutional reasons, which is until noon on January 20th, 2021, Donald Trump could do anything he wanted with these documents. And if he sent them off before noon, then it wasn't illegal for him.
Exactly. Yeah. So that has been certainly you're good. Do you have some kind of, before we started, did you cast some spell? But yes, that's it exactly. I had it, it's not clear that it was an unlawful. So that's what I've always assumed, that he, and in fact, we knew that's what he has been saying. Well, as president, he could. And as president, in fact, he could declassify, but there's no evidence he did, but just sort of have and see it. Oh, I just have one final act in office. Okay, but but you were going to say two things that weren't charged.
Yeah, and that one we should expect to see because it was on the warrant. So we know for sure that they investigated it, they considered it. So we'll hopefully get an explanation. Here's why we didn't charge it. Now, here's where the pièce de résistance is, because the other thing that we may get a discussion of is why 18 USC 2383 was not charged. We haven't seen that on a warrant, so I don't guarantee that. Now, that's insurrection. And it is hypothetical that prosecutors would at least address it because that is what he was impeached for. That is the only thing he was impeached for.
Wait, we've now just jumped back to January 6th. We've gone back to
January 6th, yeah.
And that has the that really does kick in, I think, under any interpretation.
Right. The Supreme Court in March said 18 USC 2383 is still good law. And if he were found guilty of that, he would not qualify under the 14th Amendment to be president. So this is the question that everyone has been asking for a year, and that the Supreme Court didn't bother to tell us their answer to until first March and then July. This one, I don't have a warrant like I do for the 2071. I don't have a warrant to say we know they considered it. But, when we were discussing why he charged what he did, we sort of were saying, well, maybe he didn't charge 2383 because he didn't want Trump to do exactly what he did, which is to say, I've been acquitted on it, therefore you can't charge me with it. The fear that you could avoid exactly the interlocutory appeal that Trump got because he made the argument that he did make, which is that he was immune because he had been acquitted. Or maybe there's some other reason. Right?
Yeah, I mean, this is super interesting, and I would like to see it. My assumption has always been more, at the highest levels of working this through at DOJ, it's like, that's just really, really a heavy lift that makes us the sort of determiners of whether he can be in office. Those kinds of policy, political, practical, constitutional considerations. But yeah, I would love to know it. 2383 would have been the ultimate aggressive move by a prosecutor. So this really will go to the sort of mindset that he approached the whole thing with. So I'd love to hear that. And so, my God, Marcy Wheeler, we've talked for a half an hour of things that aren't charged, and you probably have more. And I am also, I don't know, obsessed, but I'm, without having chapter and verse, just thinking that because of Eileen Cannon, because of, the happenstance that we had a January 6th committee and that brief that you've been referring to, whereas Cannon has, delayed everything and then dismissed it, there's just all kinds of things that we would learn about what the presentation of evidence in a Mar-a-Lago trial would look like, that we have a pretty good sketch in January 6th, but nothing at all, very little in Mar-a-Lago. That vast category is, do we need to do another Irish Day for that discussion, or is there, how big a corpus is that as you've thought about it?
Well, no, I think we have actually seen some of that, because Trump was trying, in some of his pretrial motions, he included 302s. So, for example, there is a career employee at the White House who's probably looking for a new job right now, who, as I said, described knowing that Trump was hoarding classified documents and that he would know they were missing if somebody moved them.
There's Attorney 16 also, right?
The potty mouth, probably Eric Hirschman, who's also probably looking for a new job right now. And he, so there are actually details about the efforts to get the documents back. They were trying to, the White House employee I told you about, they were trying to claim that Joe Biden was involved in the prosecution. And what they actually disclosed is that Mark Meadows is the one who brought in the White House counsel's office.
Wait. Who disclosed that, where, and when?
Trump did. Trump did in his effort to claim that Joe Biden was personally involved in this prosecution. So we've actually seen more 302s from the Mar-a-Lago prosecution than we have from the January 6th prosecution.
All right, but still, you said yourself, we don't even know what many of the documents are, right?
We have very basic descriptions, but remember, they would be pretty far down the road of developing substitutions, SEPA substitutions for those documents, because they were going to go to trial.
I agree. Just for everyone to understand, if there'll be litigation, or there would have been, where where the government says you can't use this one, Trump says it's necessary, and the court fashions an acceptable simulacrum of what would have been there. Okay, they'd be down the road, but we haven't seen it.
So we may get much more detail about what Trump actually took, right?
Well, no, I'm confused. They, in some kind of meet and confer process, whatever, but where? Yeah, so all right, the government possesses that information, but we don't yet. So that's what we could. So right now, this is what I'm zeroing in on.
Yeah, we might get that. Yeah.
Stuff that's there that if they came in and vaporized everything, we wouldn't get. So that would be one. Much more description about. I don't know whether or not it's the substitute document or the original. Right.
Some of them have been declassified.
All right. Now, what about potential danger to national security?
Yes.
From what he did. We don't know anything about that. Now, do you think, I guess there could be a fight within DOJ, including from the national security folks, about that. Okay, so you agree there. What about, do we know everything about, the whole generalship of Trump in the movement around of the documents through Nauta and De Oliveira, and just how flagrant and involved he was? I think like that there remains important detail. If Nauta and De Oliveira would fess up, it turned out they played it. They bet on Trump, and like Eileen Cannon, go figure, they made the right bet. But they know a lot of stuff, and Jack Smith knows what they know, but we don't know what they know, right?
We know a good deal about what they know. One thing that which has been reported by ABC, but hasn't shown up in official documents, is Trump and Nauta came back to Mar-a-Lago twice during the summer of 2022. And witnesses said that there is a bit of this that's been released in court filings, but witnesses said they came back to check on the documents. So we might find out more about those trips. But the other thing is we have every belief that there are still documents missing. We have every belief that Trump succeeded in hiding documents from the FBI because they kind of screwed up the search on August 8th, 2022. They didn't search Trump's secret room.
They listened to him. They were too nice, right?
Yeah, and then Trump actually brought boxes of documents to Bedminster where he was running a tournament for the Saudis. And then documents disappeared forever. So what happened to those documents? And we may learn what prosecutors do and don't know about that. I mean, that, to my mind, is a question that Trump should have been asked 100 times during the election and was never asked once. So, yeah, let's find out whether they know for a fact that there are documents missing.
And just to take a step back, Marcy, those are important details to make the case, but more broadly, those are huge details for history to be able to assess what the hell happened, what was the level of culpability. Watergate, it becomes a kind of a cliche. Oh, Nixon was just covering up. He wasn't too involved in the beginning. There's a story, and it's a story that's important to our history and, in judging the conduct of presidents. So there's a story here that I think we don't know, that it would be very much in Trump's interest to whitewash, that, for example, how much did he actually direct the obstruction? One little snippet of that is what brought Nixon down, which wouldn't have happened under the Supreme Court's immunity decision. So, I mean, those strike me as of intense historians now, because of the election. It's going to fall to historians in large part to really exhume, analyze what went down. And a big focus has to be Trump himself. And with what we do know, there are more or less benign or sinister stories that it strikes me as deeply in the national interest to ferret out.
Right. I mean, right now, there is a little bit of pushback against Trump from senators, but not much. There's still, like Elon Musk is threatening them with primaries, unlimited amount of money, primaries.
Yeah.
But there is some pushback, and there's not much pushback in the House. There might be a couple people, but the margins in the House are so narrow that who knows what happens, especially after Trump hires 3 people to go be part of his cabinet, right? So there's going to be this moment where there's just a 2-vote margin in the House. And what if this turns out to be something far scarier than we've even contemplated, right? What if, just as one example, there's a part of the crime scene investigation that they haven't closed the loop on, where 2 Proud Boy associates helped pincer the Capitol with Alex Jones. And it's a story that's been out there forever. Like, Alex Jones being told to lead bodies to the Capitol, and these 2 guys, one of who's a Marine, they direct people to the other side of the building, and that ends up basically opening a second front of the assault on the Capitol. That speaks to a different level of planning and premeditation. And it's something that we expect to kind of draw to a close. Maybe these 2 guys have been out there on continuances since 2021. Do we get an answer to that? Do we get an answer to, was Alex Jones bringing bodies to the Proud Boys to lead a more concerted attack on the Capitol than we know? I don't know the answer to that, but that would change how we understand this attack. Would it change Republicans?
No, I'm really right now thinking about history, really. but and the national urgency to know. But look, either there are 16 different ways that it's important, and now you've provided so many details to fill in what we would like or hope to get. Let's just finish, Marcy, but I hope you'll be back in soon with a little discussion about what we think is going to happen, because in general, it's what matters. It really is, I think, in the hands of DOJ. A decision that Smith will make to, do a report, and I agree, get out of Dodge, and Garland to release or not. Trump will try to fight it, I think, from the outside. No, what do we see as happening between now and January 20th? Because maybe you share my supposition, but whatever hasn't emerged from January 20th, once Trump takes the reins, he could literally order destroyed. So
I agree. But I suspect that Jack Smith approached this issue the same way he approached getting the case back in August, right? If you recall, he said, I need to discuss with the rest of DOJ how to move forward. I'd like 3 weeks, almost the same amount of time he asked for this time. I'd like 3 weeks to decide. And in that 3-week period, he superseded the indictment, and he shored up the indictment, not just against what Supreme Court had done, but also against the Fisher decision that attacked the obstruction charge that they had used. So my guess, it's not like Jack Smith didn't know there was an election. It's not like Jack Smith didn't know this was a possibility. And my guess is when he asked for 3 weeks until December 2nd, right, he had a plan partly in the works. Maybe we'll see the report on December 2nd. I would not rule that out.
Literally the report, you mean presented to the court? Because that'll be then there'll be a irresistible impulse to make public.
Yeah, and I think people are really, I get that they're beaten down, but I would be literally shocked if Jack Smith and Merrick Garland don't have a plan to make this public. And it'll be made public the same way the Her report, the same way the Durham report. They'll just be released publicly. And then Dick Durbin, assuming he still has time, will say, okay, Jack Smith, come give a presentation about this report to the Senate Judiciary Committee. That's how I expect it'll go. And I expect, however, again, it took them 3 weeks to write the 180-page immunity brief. And so it's possible they were already working on this draft anyway.
And this is the big magnum opus. It'll be the equivalent of the 9/11 report or the Mueller report, which was drafted each over months and months. But, Jack Smith can go with a little sleep. And Merrick Garland, I can tell you, among other things, is unbelievably fast on substance. All right, what, if anything, maybe this is a question for me, but what, if anything, will Trump be trying to do during this period from the outside to preempt this?
He doesn't have any authority to preempt it. And again, it's the obligation of the special counsel to write a report. Merrick Garland has always said, and Republicans didn't fight the release of the Durham report or the Her report.
They're really now, fit to be tied. They're hoist by their own petard in terms of the Her report. Yeah.
Right. And so, and he's not president right now. He doesn't have, and in fact, to some degree, they did change the rules on the use of non-charged people. So I suspect when we get a report, it'll look more like the Her report than the Mueller report. We won't get names. We'll have to say, oh, that's Boris Epshteyn, even though he's not named.
That's actually a change in the rules of the regs?
Yeah, they changed the rules literally just as the Her report was coming out.
For special counsel stuff in particular?
Speaking of uncharged people generally, they sort of expanded.
Oh, I see.
That.
Yeah, okay.
But it may have actually been because of the Durham report, because if you recall, Rodney Jaffe got named in death threats. But one way or another, we may not get names in the way that we did in the Mueller report. But nevertheless, the precedent is there that you get the report and you release it almost immediately and it goes public almost immediately. And then Trump, and if you're not going to be able to prosecute Donald Trump, and if you give up the cases against Nata and De Oliveira. And I think this is probably one of the bigger prosecutorial decisions they have. And they didn't ask for the extension in the 11th Circuit right away. They waited until their deadline was up. So they may have been fighting on that.
In the appeal from the dismissal, which went not just to Trump, but to Nauta and De Oliveira.
Right. Which, by the way, you know who can benefit from that now, if he's not pardoned? Hunter Biden.
Oh, right. I actually think this is a whole nother discussion. I believe, and it's a nasty kind of jerky thing, but I think Trump will extend a pardon to Biden and will actually have some litigation about whether one can turn it down and et cetera.
I think, I agree with you. I think because he does not want any appeals to go forward on that stuff.
On the question of authority, and it just seems like so magisterial. It's revolting. That'll be a whole nother conversation.
That's our next one, yeah. But if Donald Trump is not going to be prosecuted, then he has it almost works like if you have been pardoned, which effectively he has, there is no reason not to incriminate him. There is no obligation to save the trial, if you will. There is you cannot prejudice a jury because there will be no jury.
That's true. But these are broader questions now, and there's the Mueller, to me, overly gentlemanly, is that the right word, posture of like, well, if we're not going to charge him, we can't say these things because then he can't defend himself in a court of law. There'll be that thrust. I believe, you're right, I don't think there's any legal cards to play, but it'll be along the lines of the American people have decided we want to put this behind us. This is just, a final blow by the deep state, blah, blah, blah. But, there's no legal reason, but he'll make this due process argument, which is actually deeply ironic because it's the very opposite of the legal system having passed judgment on him. They instead, some crazy, you're in Europe, Brechtian ending happened where someone just showed up and at the end of Act 5 and boom, he's not in jail. But that's all the more reason, not less reason for historical account. Marcy, when we talk, I feel like you take me so deep that I'm going to get the bends in resurfacing, but it's a very, very valuable trip. As always, thank you so much. And this I think is going to be playing out now in the next 10 days or so, and they're certainly burning the midnight oil at DOJ. But what a case you've made but amplified for, why we need, and I don't see any other opportunity to get it, the real historical account of what went down in a very serious set of crimes. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for tuning in to One on One, a weekly conversation series from Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts, and please take a moment to rate and review this podcast. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we post full episodes, talking books, and bonus video content. Talking Feds remains one of the very few independent productions out there, so if you like the work we do and are inclined to support the show, joining our Patreon is the best way to do it. Plus, you'll get tons of perks like free access to my LA Times op-eds and the chance to join monthly live Q&A sessions. Thanks for tuning in, and don't worry, as long as you need answers, the feds will keep talking. Talking Feds One-on-One is produced by Catherine Devine, associate producer Gabriella Glick, sound engineering by Matt McArdle, Rosie Dawn Griffin, Hamza Mahendranathan, David Lieberman, and Emma Maynard are our contributing writers. Production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu and Genesis Magpayo. Our music, as ever, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.